Hey, Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Chavches in Yebmot. Learn for Shlomo ben Rachel, for Yosef Asriel ben Chaim Michal, and for Elazar ben Reuma. Yesterday we got down almost halfway down on the page, the first two dots, Tnan. We had discussed Rabbi Yochanan and Rav disagreed about, again, all the cases we're dealing with. This is not going to repeat it each time. Reuven and Shimon are two brothers married to two sisters, Leah and Rachel. And when they die now, they left their two wives. They left the two wives, each from Reuven and Shimon, to the brothers, let's say Levi and Yehuda. So the Mishnah said you do chalitza, not yibum. There is a case, though, the Mishnah said, that if let's say one of them it becomes more available later on. For example, if let's say one of the women dies, now there's only one available, right? So if she was originally mutter, because let's say she was the one that fell first, let's say Reuben died first, left wife Leah, and now you have Levi and Yehuda, they can do Yibam on Leah, no problem. Rachel died too. Now they got two sisters. You can't marry either one of them. It's achotz kukasa, which is an Issur Drabanan, right? But now let's say Rachel died. Rachel died. First Leah was available, right? One guy died, left a wife. Levi and Yehuda can marry her, right? Either one. One of them married. The older one's supposed to marry, right? But we learned before. Okay. Then Rachel died. Rachel's husband Shimon died. Now you got two, they can't marry either one. Now, if Rachel died, then Leah is available again. Everybody agreed that that's okay. What about the Mishnah? Says Chotzes Le'avas says, well, he says, I don't know who learned the Mishnah. It doesn't work out in this particular case. Now the Gemara says, what about this case in the Mishnah? The two women fell. Rachel and Leah fell to Levi and Yehuda, and one of them, though, let's say Leah was Levi's mother-in-law. Levi's mother-in-law. Now, having to be Levi's mother-in-law, he's married to his brothers, right? Yeah. His mother-in-law is Leah, and Reuven was married to her. His brother was married to Levi's mother-in-law. It happens, right? He was married to his mother. It can happen. So he can't marry his mother-in-law, right? So what happens in that case? So Levi could marry Rachel, who's not his mother-in-law, because he has only one girl falling to him. The mother-in-law doesn't count. So but she was also to Levi, one of the two brothers, one of the two survivors, was forbidden to marry Leah, Reuven's wife. Was Leah. Also, he can't marry her. He can marry her sister, because now you don't have two sisters falling to you. You don't have the choice of two sisters, which is a problem. You only have one, only Rachel. But Yehuda can't marry either one of them. Yehuda's not married. It's not a erva. It's not a relative to either one. It's just Yehuda's two brothers. Reuven and Leah died. Reuven and Shimon died, and they left two sisters. He can't marry either one of them because they're both achotz. In theory, he can marry one of them, right? But since there's two of them together, achotz kukasa, it's asim rabbanim, and doesn't understand. Now, salka daitek, we're assuming here to nafla chamosa tefila. Let's assume again, Levi's mother-in-law is Reuven's wife, Leah, right? If she fell first, so that was the case I said before. If she fell first, Leah fell first. Now, in that case, what happens? If his wife fell first, that's what we're assuming here. She fell first, and then Rachel fell. So, what's the problem? Why do you say you can't marry either one of them? So listen to what happened here. Leah fell first. When Leah fell first, was Yehuda available to marry her? Yeah. Levi couldn't marry her because it's his mother-in-law. But Yehuda could marry her. There was only one woman, right? Only Reuben died. Could have married her, right? Could have married her. Then what happened? Rachel became available. So now Yehuda can't marry either one because they're two sisters. Okay. But now, since Levi cannot marry his mother-in-law, but could marry Rachel, so let Levi marry Rachel, right? He could marry her. It's only one available. And now, why do you say Yehuda can't marry either one of them? Now Leah becomes re-available to Yehuda. She was originally available when she was the only sister-in-law that fell Yibam, right? And she was the only one there. Then her sister fell, Rachel. But now you got two sisters, he can't marry either one of them. But now that Rachel didn't die, she was taken as a wife by Levi, which was mutter for him to marry because he couldn't marry Leah because Leah is his mother-in-law. So now she becomes re-available again. If it's re-available, why do you say Yehuda is usher for both of them? Yehuda can marry now Leah. right? Leah was the mother-in-law of Levi. Levi couldn't marry her. He could marry Rachel. So again, if Leah became available first, who could she marry? Only Yehuda, right? Because he can marry Levi, it's his mother-in-law. But then Rachel fell, so he's got two. Can't marry him because it's achot gosa. They're sisters. Leah and Rachel are still sisters. Now, if Rachel died, you said what happens? Then Yehuda can marry her, right? That's what you said. Rabbi Yochanan said that. So the same thing, whether Rachel died or whether Rachel married Levi, who he can marry her because she's the only one he can marry. She can't marry him, can't marry his mother-in-law. She's available to him. So why can't Yehuda now marry Rachel? Marry Leah? Why can't he marry Leah? Levi married Rachel, who's not his mother-in-law. She's just a sister, but the other sister is his mother-in-law, so he can't marry her, but he could marry the sister. He could marry Rachel. So once Yehuda marries Rachel, why can't once Levi marries Rachel? Levi's mother-in-law is Leah. He can't marry Leah, but he could marry Rachel. Once Levi marries Rachel, why can't Yehuda marry Leah now, who's Levi's mother-in-law? Why shouldn't he? Why do you say both asratim? If you say that hutra but asra, there was one's available, it's mutter to marry her. When two become available, you can't marry either one. They're sisters. And then if one of them becomes available again, why? Because one of the sisters died, right? So it's not a chotz anymore. We said before, if one of the sisters died, you can marry the original one again. So here too, whether Rachel died or whether she married Levi, either way, Yehuda should be able to marry Leah now at this point, according to Rabbi Yochanan, even according to Rav. Let the chassan, what's the chassan? The son-in-law, Levi, marry Liab Hachta Enechamos, let him marry Rachel, Bereisha first, and then the mother-in-law, Leah, should be to Yehuda, to the Idach, the other brother, Ki Yavama Shehutra. She was originally mutter when she fell first, the Nesra, and then she became Musr because her Rachel fell with her too when Shimon died. Now she became mutter again because she didn't die, but Levi married her. So now there's only one available now. She should be able to she should be able to marry him again. In other words, now she should be available to marry Yehuda. Why do you say Yehuda can't marry either one of them? Because they're two sisters. They're achot skukoso. They're not achot skukoso because she becomes available again. Now, once Levi marries Rachel, there's only one woman left, Leah, who was originally mutter. Then she became Musr because Rachel became available. But now Rachel was either taken by God if she died, or taken by Levi if Levi married her. And why can't Yehuda marry again? And if Rabbi Yochanan is right, and even Rav's motive, Rav agrees with Rabbi Yochanan, or Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Rav in that case, why does the Mishnah say that Yehuda can't marry either one of them? You're right, in that case it would work. According to Rabbi Yochanan said that would work. If Leah became available first, meaning Reuven died first, Leah's available. Can marry either. Normally she could marry either one of them, but over here she's Levi's mother-in-law. He can't marry her, so she became available to Yehuda. And before Yehuda got a chance to marry her, Shimon died and Rachel became available. Now he can't marry either one because he's got two sisters, either one of which he can marry, but each one is a chotz kukoso. But then when Levi marries Rachel, because he can marry Rachel because he can't marry Leah, so now Leah should be re-available. You're right. If it happened that way, it's okay. But our Mishnah is speaking about that Rachel became available first. Shimon died first. If Shimon died first, they're both available, right? Either one could have married Rachel. Then when Leah became available, she can't marry either one. It's a chotz kukoso. And that heter never went away. Leah married Levi married Rachel. But the Isser on Leah remained. So you're right. He says the Mishnah will only come out. You want to say the Mishnah? We had a difficulty with our Mishnah because Rabbi Yochanan says the Mishnah doesn't make sense. You say they're both at the Chalitza. There are ways where you don't get Chalitza. For example, if Rachel died, she go back to the original heter. Why didn't our Mishnah give that case? Or why didn't it give this case? You're right. Says the Mishnah is a little bit difficult to quench Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Lazar, so he said, so what happens in that case? Again, Reuven and Shimon, Levi and Yehuda. Levi and Yehuda have the two sisters, do chalitza. What happens if they don't listen and they each marry one of them? Now they came from two different husbands. So in theory, if Leah and Rachel would not be sisters, Levi can marry one, Yehuda can marry another one from two different brothers, right? But they're sisters, so they can't. They're not supposed to. It's a chotz kukoso. Isser drabanan, the way we hold. Isser drabanan. Zikas and Isser drabanan. What about if they married them anyway? They didn't listen. So our Mishnah says, Beis Hillel says, no, they have to divorce them. And then we said, Reb Lezer says, Beis Shammai says they don't have to do a good divorce, and Beis Hillel says they have to get. Tanya Reb Lezer Omer Beis Shammai Omi Kaimu. Rabbi Lezer says, like Rabbi Lezer says in our Mishnah, Beis Shammai says that they could stay married. They could say, listen, we each got the right one. We're over on this is Rabbanan, but we're married anyway. You leave them that way. Beis Hillel Yotziu. You had yesterday. The first one for sure did a bad thing. The second one could say, when I married her, there was only one left, so it wasn't a chotz b'kasa. Okay, but Beis Shammai says you can leave him. Beis Hillel says you got to divorce him. That's what Rabbi Lezer learned. Rabbi Shimon Omer Yikam. Shimon Shastam, let them stay married. Now, Rabbi Shimon wouldn't interject normally. Machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel doesn't just say it goes like Beis Shammai. Why does he say? The Gemara will analyze that in a minute. But Shalom Omer that the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Shammai is the opposite. Not that Beis Hillel says they have to get divorced. Gal Hayolam Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel was makel over here, but Beis Shammai says they have to get divorced. Beis Hillel they can remain married. So Rabbi Shimon, come on, who's Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon says Yekaimu, they can stay married. Who is he going like? Is it Ika Beis Shammai? If he's going like Beis Shammai, the way we yell, so Hein Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Lezer said, Beis Shammai is the one who says Yekaimu. In other words, if he's going the way Rabbi Lezer says the machlokas is the Beis Shammai says they could stay married, so he should just say I go like Beis Shammai. Rabbi Lezer wouldn't be proper for Rabbi Shimon to interject in a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. He's not normally the Baal Plukta. He should just go I go like Beis Shammai. So Hein Rabbi Lezer, you just say I go like Rabbi Lezer. Well, Beis Shammai says you can be Mekayim. Ika Beis Hillel. If he goes like Beis Hillel, Hein Rabbi Shaul, that's Rabbi Shaul who says that Beis Hillel says Yekaimu. So who does just say go like one of them? He's a third opinion. He's another opinion. Or right. In other words, in our Mishnah, Beis Hillel says you have to get divorced. Rabbi Lezer says there's machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel says you have to get divorced. Rabbi Shaul says the other way around. Beis Hillel says you don't have to get divorced. And Rabbi Shimon says they both agree that you don't have to get divorced. That's Rabbi Shimon's been a third opinion in the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. He says there's no machlokes about that. That's what Rabbi Shimon says. Then we said in the Mishnah, again, in the case we said, this is we use this as a kasha before in Rabbi Yochanan, but that's the case we're dealing with. If Leah, who's the widow of Reuven, was Levi's mother-in-law, could be daughter-in-law, whatever the issue was, then what happens? Then he can marry the other one, right? Levi can marry Rachel because it's not a chotz kukasa. Chotz kukasa means two sisters fall to you. You could marry either one of them. So the rabbi said it's like a chos ishto. Don't marry either one of them. Just do chalitza. But if one of them is prohibited to you anyway because she's an erva, like she's your mother-in-law, then you can marry the other one. So the Gemara says, what's the chiddush in this Mishnah? We had this back on Daf Chaf. Achosik shi yivimta. If two sisters fall as yivamos, ochelet samas yabemes. Right? If one of them is an erva, if one of them is a relation to you, you could do chalitza or yivim. So we had that before in the Mishnah back on Daf Chaf. Says Tzricha. There was speaking about where there was only two brothers, Reuben and Shimon. Reuben and Shimon, right? Reuben and Shimon were what was the case there back on Daf Chav? So the Mishnah said it was a Mishnah there. Mishnah said Achos she yavimta. What's the case? And Rashi says over there. There was Mishnah Mina again. Reuben and Shimon married to Leah and Rachel, a usual case, but there was only one brother, right? There was only one Levi. There was no Yehuda. So now what happens? He's got two sisters fall to him, so he can't marry either one. Right? Levi's the only guy. There's no Yehuda. However, if one of them is Levi's mother-in-law, then he can marry the other one, right? That's the same thing. We had it before. Right? What's the difference is here? Here there's Levi and Yehuda. In our Mishnah is Levi and Yehuda. Over there is only Levi. So the Gemara says that's why you need it. You don't have to worry that that there's a second brother. That what do you say that Levi can marry the one who's not his mother-in-law, right? Levi can marry Rachel. So there you don't have to worry about. Well, if Levi marries Rachel, you're afraid that Yehuda will marry Leah, which he's not supposed to. There you don't have to worry about it because there's no Yehuda, there's only Levi. There's two girls, one is his mother-in-law, he can marry the other one. But over here, if we allow, where there's also a Yehuda, and we allow Levi to marry Rachel, we're afraid that Yehuda will marry Leah, which he can't do because it's a chotz kukasa, because they're both available to him. So I might think we don't allow Levi to marry Rachel, even though he could, but we're afraid if he marries Rachel, maybe Yehuda will marry Leah. So therefore we have to tell you the chiddush here too, that no, we allow Levi to marry Rachel. And if you tell me the case over here it's different. You know why? because you're not worried about losing the rules of achotz kukaso. The rabbi said achotz kukaso is like achotz ishto. If two women fall to you and they're sisters or their mother and a daughter, whatever, you can't marry either one. Give them chalitza. So over here, you're not worried about losing that halacha because Yehuda, we prohibit Yehuda from marrying either one, right? So that rule was saying, Avul Hasam, the lekesheni emelo. Over there, you might say, listen, there's only Levi, and Levi can't marry Leah, so he can marry Rachel. No, you shouldn't marry Rachel either, because if he marries Rachel, we'll think that you could always marry Achotz Kukaso. You won't know that it's usher to marry Achotz Kukaso, because he has two sisters are falling to him, and he's marrying one of them. He's marrying one of them because the other one's his mother-in-law. But you might not understand that. You might permit achotz kukaso. So we tell me both guys. In general, we don't say that. Isser mitzvah, the last line on Daf Hayomi. Isser mitzvah. Again, if one of them is not usher as an erva, one of them is not your mother-in-law, it's simply your grandmother, which is only usher drabanan. Remember, that's a shniya. It's called isser mitzvah. Let's say one of them is your mother-in-law. So the Mishnah said you do chalitza because minator you can do yibam. So we learned this also. Isser mitzvah, we had that before also. That same Mishnah Daf Hayomi. Says Hasam mitzvah lechuda, hachus mitzvah chosa. Again, over there is simply an Isser mitzvah. One of them is Isser mitzvah. So what do? You do chalitza to her, right? There we say you do if it fell to you chalitza. If one of them is mitzvah, so it's only her. But over here we're talking about where's an Isser mitzvah? One of them is an Isser mitzvah. One of them is your grandmother, and one of them is her sister, which is not also to you at all. So Sakha Chamina Leikem Isser Mitzvah Makom Isser Erva. That if one of us is an Isser Mitzvah, you can't marry because she's your grandmother. She's like an Erva, and you can marry the other one. In other words, that the rabbis would not make their takana. The whole idea over here is again, Chos Zukrasa is an Isser Drabanan. Minatora, yeah, you have to do Chalitz or Yibim, but there's no business about a Zika that makes it like she's partially your wife. So some, like Mr. Mitzvah, that Isser Mitzvah would be like an Isser Erva V'Tziabam, and you can marry the other one. Kamashma, we don't. V'Tziabam, why not? It's keeping the Maraisa Rami Kamei Kapaga B'Chos Kukaso, right? Why don't you do Yibam? Why don't you do Yibam? Keeping the Maraisa Rami Kamei, since Maraisa she can marry too, so it's Achos Kukaso. Even though one of them is your grandmother, but your grandmother and her sister fall to you to Yibam. Again, Reuben and Shimon are married, right? To Leah and Rachel. And Reuven dies, and Leah is Levi's grandmother, on his mother's side, whatever, you understand? So he could marry her, Minatorah, but the rabbi said not. Since Minatorah, it's mother marry her. Each one has a choska. So Sachim mitzvah of a rabbanan. But the rabbi, I might think that Minarabbanan, the rabbi say what? Because of the mitzvah of me, here the mitzvah is the kiyum mitzvah of Yibam. Rashi, right, even where we are, Mishum mitzvah of the Rabbanan, Shetaskai mitzvah Yibam, below immediate mitzvah Zika. Again, the Isser of Zika, Chotz Gosu is the Rabbanan. Shum Divrayim, lesser asachosa, Hecha, Dihiyala Isser mitzvah. It's only an Isser mitzvah, so you have a mitzvah of Yibam. Maybe you should ignore that and say what? That marry the other one. Let marry and you should be allowed to marry the other one. Because what do we say here? On our mission, we say if one of us is an Isser mitzvah, what do we say? Choletz is v'lo mitzvah bemes. Isser mitzvah. A Mishnah says, Isser mitzvah is a kedusha, choletz is v'lo mitzvah bemes. You give her chalitza. So you might say, listen, that's a chotz kukaso. That's the point over here. Over there, it's only Isser mitzvah lechuda, so you say give her chalitza. But over here, there's a sister involved too. So I might think, listen, pretend that the grandmother, the Leah, who's your grandmother, is like an erva, and marry the other one. Kamashma, we don't say that. Why not? Why not? Even the Midaraisa, because since Midaraisa can marry either one of them, therefore it's a chotz kukaso. Mitzvah of a rabbanan, the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah became a kaim, the rabbis would say that relax the rules of Zika over here. To sky mitzvah even below Amida Isra Zika Shim Debrahim Lesser Sachosa Hechad Hiyala Isra Mitzvah, and you should be able to marry the sister. Consider Isra Mitzvah, consider the grandmother like an erva. Kamashma, we don't say that. If one of them was an erva, again Hasu Lamali, then you said what do you say? You said if Leah was Levi's mother-in-law, and if Rachel was Yehuda's mother-in-law, so what happens? Levi can marry Rachel, and Yehuda can marry Leah, right? Right? Why? Because it's not two sisters falling to you. So Yehuda cannot marry Rachel because it's his mother-in-law. And pardon? The two of them are sisters. The two girls are sisters, but one's mother-in-law, one's the other one's mother-in-law, and they're girls, right? Yeah, understand? They're each a mother-in-law. One is a mother-in-law of Levi, one's a mother-in-law of Yehuda. So the one who's a mother-in-law of Levi can't marry Levi, so I can't. So Levi can marry the other one, and the one who's a mother-in-law of Yehuda, he can marry the other one. So that's what you could do. But what's the chiddush in that? We already said if Leah was Levi's mother-in-law, so what can Levi do? He can marry Rachel, right? Okay. So why do you have to tell me also? Oh, and also if Rachel was Yehuda's mother-in-law, so he can marry Leah because he doesn't have two girls falling to him, right? If Yehuda is not related to either one of them, then he can't marry either one because there's a chotz kukas, they're both falling to him. But if one of them is his mother, like, you marry the other one. But once you tell me on one side, what I have to tell me, oh, if both girls are mothers-in-law of Levi, just tell me once. It's the same thing. It's the mali chad, mali trey. What's the difference? I get the idea. It's richa. I need it. The iyashmin and hasam mishim the ika sheni demuch. Over there, at least in the first case, where only one of them is an erva, in the first case in the Mishnah, where Leah is Levi's mother-in-law, but Yehuda is not related to either Leah or Rachel, other than they were the wives of his deceased brothers. So since he can't marry either one, we see the idea of a chotz kukaso. But over here, where they're both getting married at the end of the day, people look at it and say, they don't know it's some other. People say, oh, two wives fell from Reuben and Shimon to Levi and Yehuda, and they're both performing yibum. What about a chotz kukaso? Apparently that doesn't exist. Because they're both getting married. Levi is marrying Yehuda's mother-in-law, and Yehuda's marrying Levi's mother-in-law. They're both, and they're sisters. There's no evidence of achotz gosa. I wouldn't say that. The fact that one can marry the other one's mother-in-law, and this one can marry the other one's mother-in-law, shows you that, and they can't. It shows you that there is an isra achotz gosa normally, except over here it's the erva. But over there it's not so evident. Because one is marrying and the other one's not marrying, but it's not so evident. The fact over here that each one can only marry one shows you maybe over here it's different. Maybe here it's allowed, but in the case before where it's only one of them, maybe you wouldn't allow Levi to marry Rachel, because since Yehuda can't marry either one, right? So maybe Levi also should not be allowed to, because you're afraid that people think chotz kukaso is okay. Kamash we don't say it. Zui sha'amru. Then we said at the end, the very last words of the Mishnah were, this is the case of a chosek shivim that when two sisters fall yibam together, right? To fall yibam together, you could do chalitza or yibam. Why? Because each one is an erva on the other one. Again, Reuben and Shimon's wives fell to Levi and Yehuda. One is a mother-in-law to Levi, one's a mother in Yehuda, so each one can marry the other one. Zui lemute, what does it come to exclude? Zui, this one, mash for something else. Lemute isra mitzvah lezev isra mitzvahs, as we said before. If one of them was a grandmother of one, and one was a grandmother of another, then you can marry a grandmother, and therefore you still need chalitza. Again, hasu lamali hainu ach. It's the same thing. We've said this before. We've had this before. The same idea, right? Rashi says hainu ach. We already learned you get chalitza on them. What's the chiddush in there? Hainu ach. Mali lechad mali l'trei. Says Ma'adu saying Nikila. I mean, okay, Isra mitzvah, Malkum Isra Erva. Where do we not say that an Isra mitzvah is like an Isra Erva? And since this one's forbidden to you, you can marry the other one. Because you're worried about the second one. If you allow this one, you might allow the other one to get married. The other one who's not an Isra mitzvah. Because both of them have the same situation. In other words, if Leah is Levi's grandmother and Rachel is Yehuda's grandmother, we don't have to worry that you might be matzah because both of them have a grandmother and both of them can marry the other one. And I might think, listen, Levi shouldn't marry his grandmother, not min Torah, but Levi is not going to marry his grandmother, he'll marry the other one, and Yehuda's not going to marry, he'll marry the other one. And maybe think they can make yibum. Kamashma, we don't say that, and they still do only chalitza. Amar Rav. Now, with this Gemara we had back on Testament Days, exact same Gemara. There the Gemara referred to, remember he had a 16 case and said, why didn't you list it? Oh, no, because it's a machlokes, so we don't want to list it. Well, yeah, we have other machlokes, and well, in that parak, we don't have machlokes. The Gemara went on to say, remember the 15 cases, of the 15 cases of Ma'aseh, it works out that if there's two of them are sisters, two sisters fall, they can each marry the other ones, each one, like in this case here, where two sisters fall, but one's an heir to one, one's an heir to the other. Okay, so in that case, so it works out in all cases except for one. We'll see. In all 15 cases, it works out. In other words, normally if two sisters fall to you to Yibum, you can't marry either one. It's a chotz kukaso, right? And therefore you have to do chalitza. But if one is an heir to you, one's an heir to you. For example, if one of them is a daughter to you, let's say, I'm going to give you a weird case now, but we're going to see that's why you're going to argue about that. We're going to argue about that. Rav Yehuda says the 15 cases that work out, meaning normally we say you can't marry your erva, and the tsar is also forbidden. But if two women fall to you and one is an erva, you could marry the other one, right? You could marry the other one, where let's say it's a chosa. There are two sisters, and one of them is related to you, right? Sheyivimta. You could do chalitza or yavim on the other one. Each one could do it on the other one. Okay, Rav Yehuda says it's only michamosa, only from the 7th case and on. Avashis above the ratio. The first 6 cases of the 15 law. My time, keeping the beat of onsin mishkachasla and asul mishkachasla. Since the case of the daughter only works out the onsin by, let's say, out of wedlock, by rape or out of wedlock, and doesn't work out with a marriage. But asun kamay ben onsin like we're only talking about marriages now. What do we mean by that? How do you have a case of two sisters in the case of daughters? Now, in the case of daughters, you can't have a marriage. Why? Because how are they sisters? From the mother's side. If they're sisters on the father's side, then there's no even. They can't be married to the brothers. So we're talking about over here. Now, if Levi, let's assume Levi and Yehuda, they both call it rape. They both raped the same woman. We'll call her Anusa. Let's call her Anusa. They both raped the same woman, and they both had a daughter from that same woman. Okay. Now, one is Levi's daughter, one Yehuda's daughter. Can Reuben and Shimon marry those daughters? Yes, they're nieces to them, right? So Reuben and Shimon married those two daughters, who are their mothers, they're daughters of the same Anusa, but they had different fathers, Levi and Yehuda, right? Different fathers. Now, Reuben and Shimon die after they married those two daughters with no children, of course, right? And the two girls fall Yibam to Levi and Yehuda, right? So what happens over there? Levi can marry Yehuda's daughter and Yehuda can marry Levi's daughter. Very simple, right? That's a case of two sisters who fell. Why are they sisters? Because they had the same rapist mother, rapey, whatever. Mother was raped, Nusa. And however, it only works out where they were raped. Why? Or out of wedlock. Why? Because if Levi was married to Anusa and then divorced her, okay, can Yehuda marry her? Of course not. So it only works out in the case of rape or out of wedlock. It doesn't work out. So Rav Yehuda says, he says, it doesn't work out in the case of a daughter. Why? Because in the case of the daughters, if the sisters are daughters to you, not mothers-in-law, not sisters-in-law, they are daughters to you, that only works out in the case of rape. And we don't want to talk about rape or out of wedlock. We're talking about Rav Yehuda. So therefore he says, now it does work out in the other, in cases number 2 to 6, where it's a granddaughter, then it could work out even in marriage. But since it doesn't work out with the daughter, because that was the first case mentioned, who are they? Daughter. The first one is Bito, Bas Bito, Bas Pro, Bas Ishto, Bas Pro, Bas. The other ones are all granddaughters, right? Of you or your wife. That could work out in marriage, but the first one's not. So we leave out all the ones that are related to daughter, and he leaves out the first 6. Okay, so he just leaves out. Keeping the bito only works out like I just explained. But Ryan says no. Either 15 cases work out with a daughter too. So what if it was out of wedlock? We're just looking for cases. We're always looking for weird cases. That's what this whole Masechta is about, right? These strange cases to work out what the halacha is in every case that could happen. Even it's not just theoretical; it could happen. So why keeping the shkuchim? If you do find it, it could happen. I just gave you that case, right? Yehuda and Levi both raped the same woman. They each had a daughter. Those daughters married Reuben and Shimon respectively. Reuben and Shimon died, and they fell to Yehuda and Levi. So you buy bones sometimes. You buy bones like we work out. What's this case? If Levi was born after Reuben died, remember there is no yibum in that case. It's like mitzvah. Okay, so it's keeping the libid of Shimon. Now, how does it work out with their two sisters? Where you're talking about two sisters who are a case of Eish Lamo. How does it work? Keeping the libid of Shimon. It only works out according to Rav Shimon. Who's Rav Shimon? Remember, Rav Shimon says that Eishach Shabalama is only if the kid was born before the brother performed Yibum, But let's say Reuben died, left a wife, and then Shimon married her, right? Shimon performed Yibum, and then Levi was born. That's okay. That's not Eishach Shabalama. If Shimon subsequently died, he could perform Yibum. According to we hold the Chachamim, no, Levi was born. If Reuben died, that's Levi, that woman Leah. Levi never, Levi was born after that. That's Eishach Shalom forever and ever. Even if Shimon and Yehuda and everybody else marries her, it's Eishach Shalom. But if Shimon, it's not Eishach Shalom unless he was born before Yibum was performed. But if Yibum was performed and then he was born, that's okay. So that only works out. So this case only works out according to Shimon. That's what he says. But Aval Eishach Shalom lo doesn't work out there. Keep it the leave it of Shimon. It only works out according to Rav Shimon, as we're going to explain in a minute. We're not talking about machlokas. That's what the Gemara first says. That's what he says. Rav Safra Matargim Afei Shav Shlomo. No, it works of Shlomo. It works out in the case that we're going to describe in a minute. Have patience. B'shisa Achi with 6 brothers. But leave it of Shimon. And it goes with it's the same Gemara we had back on Testament Bays. The Simonach and your Simon is Mason the oven, Mason the oven. What happened? Reuben died. Then another kid was born. Then Yibum was performed. Then another brother died. Shimon died. No Yibum. What's the case? Here's going to explain. Reuben and Shimon assume we had this case back on Testament Based Rashi. We explained it there. Reuben and Shimon assume Techios. Reuben and Shimon are married to 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel. Levi and Yehuda assume Shtei Nachos. Levi and Yehuda are married to 2 other girls. It says Nachrios, meaning they're not related to Leah and Rachel. But I'm going to tell you they are sisters also. Let's just assume they're all sisters, even though Nachrios doesn't know Nia. They're not related to Leah and Rachel. So Levi and Yehuda are married to these 2. Now, Mace Reuben died. No Led Yisachar, a 5th brother was born. He's Eishach Shalom Balamo, right? He wasn't in one after the Yibam Levi was performed Yibam on Leah, right? Because he was around. Mace Shimon, now Shimon died. No Led Zvulun. Zvulun was born now afterwards. The Yibam Yehuda, and Yehuda was Meyabam, Shimon's wife. Mesu, Levi, Yehuda. Now Levi and Yehuda both died below Bonim, but Naflikam Eisachim, so they fell for Yisachim Zvulun. Hasul is Mutar. One's usher to one, and one's usher to Yisachar is Mutar to Zvulun. Hasul is Mutar. What do you mean by that? Who's usher to Yisachar? Leah. Why? Because he was born after Reuven died, before Levi performed Yibam on her. He can't marry. However, he was born before Shimon died, so he can marry Shimon's wife, right? That's what I mean. The Zvulun now, and Zvulun can marry what? Leah. Why? Can marry Leah. Why? Because when he was born, Leah had already married Levi. So he was born, according to Rav Shimon, he had already been married. She had already been married. So it's not Eishach Shavulim, but Yisachar, right? And Nachotshi Yivimta. So this is the case of Achotshi Yivimta. 2 sisters fell now. Leah and Rachel fall to Yisachar and Zvulun. Leah can never marry Yisachar, but she could marry Zvulun. And Rachel, who cannot marry Zvulun. Why? Because Zvulun was born after Shimon died, and therefore it was Eishach Shalom for Rachel there. But he could marry Leah. Why? Because when he was born, Levi had already performed Yibam on his wife. So according to Reb Shimon, that would be okay. It's not Eishach Shalom. Okay, fine. So it only works out according to Reb Shimon, but according to Rabbanan, it wouldn't work out because they're all Eishach Shalom. They can never get married, and there wouldn't be Asur Zem Mutar Seh. The Gemara then says, "Lamali Yav Yehuda." What do you need Yehuda even to marry? We don't need Yehuda. Leave Yehuda out of it. You can just have Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Shimon and Levi perform Yibam on Reuven and Shimon's wives respectively. Then they fall before Yisachar. You don't need Yehuda to get married for. You're right. And they fell before now Zvulun and Yisachar the same way. What do you need Yehuda to marry her for? You don't need Yehuda to marry to form Yibam. So below Yibam Nami Yehuda Mishkachsla. The answer is Mishum Tsara, because we're talking about a case where, remember, the Isra of these things is that these sisters also forbid their Tsara. So you would add a Tsara, and that's why we add on to show that it works even the Tsaras, meaning that the Tsaras were also sisters, that Yehuda and Levi's wives who weren't related to Rachel and Leah, but they were also sisters to one another, and therefore Achas were also that the one is also one is more to the other. Thought that of Tsara, what about Tsara? Even Mishri said Tsara. Michael could go into how to be been the God Ba'asher. You're right. If God Ba'asher were born later, they did it. then it would work again. Then they fell before Yisachar and Zvulun. You'd have it with the Sarah, and they're all, in all these cases, you can work out where if they're married to two sisters, that's the idea that two sisters fell Yibam, and the one is also the one is mutter the other one. In other words, normally two sisters fall to you, you can't make Yibam, right? Whether you're one brother or two brothers, you can make him because achos kukaso. But if one is your mother-in-law and one is his mother-in-law, you can marry the other one. If one is your daughter and his daughter, you can marry the other one, and so on and so forth. And it works out in all cases. The last case, Avshalom, only works out according to Rav Shimon, as we just described. Says the Mishnah, Shlosha Achim. Listen, one more case. Shlosha Achim, three brothers. And Reuben Shem married to Leah and Rachel. O Isha Bita. It could be two sisters, or it could be a mother and a daughter. O Isha Bas Bita, O Isha Bas Mana. In other words, two women fall to Harel, and then they die, and they fall to Levi. Why? It's a chotz kukaso, or it's the mother of kukaso. You can't marry midrabanan. Rab Shimon says you don't even need chalitza. Listen to this, you don't even chalitza. Why? Isn't Zika a chotz kukaso only drabanan? So you should need at least chalitza. Rab Shimon holds that if they fall to you even together, midoraisa, there's no chalitza. He holds when they fall to you together, it's the Zika. The achotz kukaso is the oraisa achotz kukaso. Shim poter. Oh, if one of them is Isser Erva. The same thing. If one of them to Levi was his mother-in-law, the same thing. Even though it's a mother and a daughter falling even to you from Reuben and Shimon, a mother and daughter are two sisters. But if one's your mother-in-law, you can marry the other one. Isser mitzvah, Isser mitzvah. Again, if one of them is only an Isser mitzvah, you do chalitza yibim. Now, what's the chiddush now? It's time to Shimon poter b'shteim and a chalitza menayibim. Shimon says, like we saw in Mishnah, paters. Pater means you don't need chalitza. He says, you know what the pasuk is? When a woman to her sister becomes sorrows to one another, they fell yibam together. That's what the pasuk's speaking about. Reuben and Shimon are married to two sisters, or a mother and a daughter, and when they fall yibam together, lo sikach. There's no you don't marry them at all. There's no mitzvah of yibam, no mitzvah of chalitza. Big chiddush. So what's the chiddush? We had it before. Rav Shimon is a chiddush Rav Shimon. In those, yes, in the Rabbanan, we knew it already. But according to Rav Shimon, Sachem, and a whole of Rav Shimon, since Rav Shimon says, you don't need anything. I might be gozer too, because what about two sisters in general who are not, right? Two sisters in general who fall yibum. Maybe you'd say they're also what? Aval Rav Shimon, says Rashi, look at the last two lines in Rashi in the page. Aval Rav Shimon, Damar Isra, Chos Gosa, Erba Gemura, Drachmana Pater, Kamla Be Isra Eshesach. Even if one of the sisters is your mother-in-law, you shouldn't marry the other one anyway. Why? Because since two sisters who fall, or a mother and a daughter who fall to you, yibam, once they become tsaros like that, there's no chalitza at all. We hold it's only before now. We hold it's only Yisra Rabbanan, so you have to do chalitza. Rav Shimon knows there's no chalitza in yibam. So you know what? Even if one of them is your mother-in-law, maybe you should be able to marry the other one. Rav Shimon says you could marry the other one. One is your mother-in-law, you could marry the other one. Maybe since Rav Shimon is so machmed, achos kukaso is a doraisa. There's no yibam, no chalitza. It's like it's eishach shalom malkum mitzvah. It's like eishach that has children. So you might think, you know what? Even if one of them is an erva, you shouldn't marry the other one. But lo liyav machosa, lo leis liyiv machosa, you shouldn't chasru come to be married in a regular case achos kukaso. So Kamashmo, you don't say that. I might say that in this case, where one of them is your mother-in-law, your daughter-in-law, you shouldn't marry the other one either, even though she's the only one that's sakuk to you. Your mother-in-law is not skuka to you, but you might not, because you really shouldn't come to marry a chotz where one of them is not your ever. Kamashmo, we're not goes to that. Isra mitzvah. Why do you say at the end Mishnah here? Rav Shimon says you don't do it. Right? The answer is because mitzvah the alma, you do chalitza. According to Rav Shimon, you don't need, right? When two sisters fall to you, whether one's a mitzvah, Isra mitzvah or nothing, there's no chalitza. What do you need? Why do you say we have chalitza? And this is Rav Shimon. The answer is I might think, right? Let's say just one woman fell to you, and she's an Isra mitzvah. There you have to do chalitza. So I understand her. But her sister is not. Then why do you need chalitza there? Because of her mazel. Same thing you have chalitza husband. By erva when I go to that. By one of them's an erva. Even Rav Shimon says you don't need chalitza on the erva. It's a shiny erva. The migmagmirla in shivakos. Everybody knows if she's an erva, you don't need chalitza. If she's your mother-in-law, you don't have to give her chalitza because clearly there's no zika there at all. But in the other case where it's by Isser Mitzvah, we say you even need chalitza on her. Why? Because even though Minat technically holds you don't, we're afraid in the case of Stam Isser Mitzvah, where there's no sisters falling to you, just one girl fell to you and she's your mother, your grandmother. So there you need chalitza. So we say you need chalitza there too. Even if your grandmother's one of two sisters who fell to you, you still got to give them both chalitza because we're afraid in another case you won't give them chalitza. So we say you need chalitza there too. All right, we'll pick up the mission tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem.